Well, let me try to articulate this because you're speaking to one of the things that is very tiring about the whole pre-draft industrial complex.
It is, yes.
There's this effort to turn it all into a mathematical equation, and there's an obsession over value. And, oh, no, you can't take this guy here. That's a reach. Oh, if you get this guy here, that's a great value pick. Nobody knows what any of these guys are going to become at the NFL level. And when the grades come out, and I don't know if you did draft grades, and I apologize in advance if I'm going to paint with too broad a brush.
No.
Draft grades are asinine.
Right.
Nobody knows what any of these guys are going to do. That is the one big factor that always gets overlooked in the Mel Kiper obsession with, oh, did you get enough value? Oh, did you reach? Oh, that's the best player available. You should take him because I say he's the best player available. We don't know what any one of these players is going to do until they play. And what happens is, and this is what is so insane about it, by the time we know, there's never a checklist or a report card. And people say, well, why don't you do draft grades 3 years after the fact? Because nobody cares by then. We're on to the next draft. It's the damnedest thing. It's like this big buildup, and there's all this analysis and assessment, and then the draft ends, and everybody goes about their business again.
Right.
Until it's time to get ready for the next draft.
Right. No, exactly right. Like, let's take the Atlanta Falcons. We were talking about them. Let's talk about them again. They're getting dragged for the trade, right? Yeah, the trade, the value, they gave up a lot to move up. There's no denying that. There's no denying that. And it does put more pressure, but at the same point, they believe in that player. And if I just looked at the players they got in the draft, I go, damn, they had a good draft. I like the players. They addressed needs, right? All of that. Okay, the trade was a little expensive, but they were convinced he's a difference-making player and he's going to change their team. So be it. Okay, I have these conversations a lot, right, Mike? It is. It's a thing that still is being argued and talked about in the NFL. Wait, we think his value's at 55 to 75. Do we really want to take him at 35 or 40? But wait, if he's one of the guys we're convinced that we really think is an awesome player that's going to work in a crapshoot like you're talking about, but this is one of the guys that we're really like, we like him and we think we really see it's going to work, who the hell cares about the value of what everybody else thinks? Take the player, but that's a conversation and a little bit of a civil war that still goes on in the NFL in some of these draft rooms and leading up to the draft.
The best example that I could think of to compare this to is you're spending years to build a rocket. And you're using all the mathematical equations and all the stuff is going into it, and you're spending so much time and you're obsessing over every little detail. And every time you fire the rocket, you know there's a 50-50 chance it's going to explode on the launching pad. Like, at a certain point, why are you spending all this time and effort obsessing over every little detail when you know at the end of the day it is a 50-50 proposition and it is driven by factors that you have no way of properly assessing? Because what happens? You lived it. College football versus NFL football. It's a different world. And some guys click and some guys just don't. And they have no way of knowing. I mean, there are little clues if you really care. Yeah. If you don't, there are things that you can see that may. But if there was a formula, Chris, somebody would have cracked it by now. And every one of their draft picks, it would go Hall of Famer, perennial Pro Bowler, consistent starter. There'd never be a bust. There'd never be a mistake. If there was a code to be cracked by now, somebody would have done it.
No, you're right. It's an imperfect system. You do your best to accumulate the most knowledge possible and bring it all together to hopefully make the best assessment possible to then pick the guy. But no, you're not always right. Sometimes you're convinced and all the things work and you make the pick and you get there and go, man, the guy just doesn't. We heard he wanted to work, but yeah, man, he got to the NFL. He doesn't want to work. We can't get any fire under him. We can't get him to play hard. And then sometimes it could be the opposite. Could be a guy that, hey, we'll take him in the 6th round. We like his physical attributes, but there's a lot of things that don't meet up with our culture, but he's the best player on the board. So you take him, and sometimes that guy has grown up in the meantime or realized or he's disrespected by being the 6th round. Now he's a worker. He wasn't a worker in college. So, again, to what you're saying, there's a human element that you just don't know, and you try to do your best to get all the clues and information you can and make the best possible choice off of that. I think we do see teams that are better at it than other ones, but, yeah, nobody's perfect. That's for sure.
It would be an interesting experiment to have one team say, you know what? We're not going to devote any time and effort. We're just going to sit back and we're going to see what everybody else does. And we're going to see what all the pundits have to say. And we're going to make our board based upon all the stuff that we find in the media. We're not going to spend money on going here and there. We're not going to do background checks. We're not going to do anything. And, as I say that, that's already kind of happened. The Bengals of about 20 years ago did that. They had no scouting staff. They did. And that's how they ended up with so many guys that got in trouble off the field. And people thought that, like, Mike Brown had this Father Flanagan thing where he, home for wayward boys. No. When they would get to round 3 or 4, they wouldn't know who to take. So they would take the first round guy that fell to round 3 or 4. I guarantee you 20 years ago, Shedeur Sanders would be in Ohio, but in Cincinnati, not Cleveland.
Right.
Because, hey, who the hell are we taking in round 4? I don't know. We don't have any scouts on the payroll. And they didn't. They still have, in comparison to other teams, a very, very small scouting staff. But I wonder if at the end of the day, how much money is being wasted on all of this stuff, given what you get on the back end. That if you would just decide to pare it down and just cherry pick whatever you can get from the media, from whatever's out there, and not spend all that money and not spend all that time, I think that you probably would get pretty much the same thing that you get anyway. The problem is if everybody did it, then no one would be scouting.
Right.
But I feel like there's a capacity for a limited number of teams to say, you know what, we're not spending this money anymore. We know it's a crapshoot. We know what our needs are. We know who can play. We know who can't play. Let's just do it based on the film, and we'll pick our guys based upon the boards that are crafted, through all the mock drafts and all the stuff that gets out there. I just think that some of these owners who are cheap have to be tempted. Because how do you justify all the money you've spent, Chris, when at the end of the day it is flip of a coin?
No, I hear you. Well, I don't want to say flip of a coin because I don't think it's totally that. But there is some flippage of coinage there. Okay, yeah, it's not perfect, but like we said, we've seen a number of teams who certainly seem to be better at it than others. The New England Patriots and their system and what Bill Belichick did and how detailed and everything they were in scouting and all of that and finding value players and the free agents and all these people like that, they would tell you, hey, there was great value. That was a big part of why we had a 20-year dynasty. We found players in free agency or late in the draft and kept it quiet through our own thing. And between our personality test and all of that, we felt like these guys fit our culture to where they'd be a team that would go, no, all of that stuff that you talked about, we went all in on it and it paid off for us. But it's a lot of work. And you got to spend some money like you're talking about. And you got to really dig into some things there. And not everybody's willing to do that either. But, it's an interesting process. It's a psychological experiment is what it is.
I mean, at the end of the day, there are only so many mathematical equations you can run to even begin to crack the code of how a human being is going to react. And everybody is different, and every situation is different. And some guys step up, and some guys don't, and it's that simple.
Well, to your point,
and there's no crystal ball.
No, to your point too, like what we said a little earlier in the week, and even in last week, this is where it's getting, because it's such a big sport. It is big money. The players are so close. The kids are getting money out of college, so they might be in a different spot mentally where, hey, 10 years ago, guys were coming to college. I haven't made $1. I need to make money. Let's go. Some of these guys are like, damn, I already got $10 million in the bank. I got $7 million in the bank. I'm feeling good, right? And that's where, again, it's got into more of the, does he love football? What is he going to work? Do we think he'll fit the culture? And I think a lot of what you're saying, and because of that, teams had favored, and I think we saw that in the draft, and you could argue that with Emeka Ibuka and other guys. You just go, let's just take the guy that we know is going to come here, work hard, love being here, and he's going to love playing football. And I think you're seeing that a little more in the NFL right now.
We need to take a break, but I want to say this. I was talking to a GM last night, and I said, now that the dust has settled, what happened with Shedeur Sanders?
Yeah.
And the GM said that Sanders and another guy who went in round 1, and I don't want to drag him into this yet because this hasn't previously been articulated.
Yeah.
But Sanders and another guy taken in round 1, their attitude was they were being recruited,
right?
Not they were interviewing. And for quarterback especially, and this other guy wasn't a quarterback, but for quarterback especially, you can't have that attitude.
No.
And the fact that Jackson Dart and Tyler Shuck really embraced the idea that I'm selling myself to the teams, that's why they did. You know, sometimes when guys rise up the board, it's because the media didn't know where the guys already were. Sometimes guys can rise up the board in the pre-draft process, especially quarterback. If you impress people with what you are doing, and apparently we're talking Shedeur later.
But no, you're right. They got in the trust tree. He fell out of the trust tree. They got in the trust tree. And then in the quarterback, like you're saying, the trust tree is more important than just about anything. You're getting the keys to the organization. Right. They climbed it.
Shuck and Dart climbed it.
Right.
And Shedeur and another guy just kind of stood there and said, well, the tree should climb me.
Yeah, right.
And that was the attitude the teams had, and they're not going to take you if they think that your attitude is we should be recruited. But what else are they going to think? They've been recruited their whole life.
Yeah.
And they've been recruited from one school to the other. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.